The sky over Paris burned red. The bells of the city rang in terror, because what came from the north was not an army. It was a storm, and leading it was Ragnar Lodbrok, the man who would make the world tremble at the name Viking. The wind howled like wolves across the gray waters of the North Sea. 40 longships sliced through the waves, their prows carved with dragons, their sails striped red and black. Each one carried men of the north, raiders, killers, dreamers, the Vikings. Their oars beat the sea in rhythm, their war cries swallowed by the storm. At the head of this armada stood Ragnar Lodbrok, the scourge of kingdoms, the man whose name was whispered from the fjords of Norway to the halls of kings in Christendom. He stood at the prow of his ship, cloak snapping in the wind, eyes fixed on the horizon. Behind him, the men rowed in silence until one finally asked, "Ragnar, where does this river lead?" Ragnar smiled, his teeth flashing in the mist. "To glory or to hell. Both lie in the same direction." Their destination was the richest prize in all of West Francia, Paris, the jewel of the Seine. The Carolingian Empire under King Charles the Bald believed itself untouchable. Its walls were high, its army vast, the pride of Frankish might. But the Franks had grown soft, their soldiers more accustomed to parades than to war. The Northmen had no fear of walls, nor of kings. They sought silver, slaves, and song, the kind of immortality that comes only from fire and blood. When the Viking fleet reached the mouth of the Seine, the monks at Rouen rang their bells in terror. The sea itself seemed alive with dragon prows and shields of red and gold. "Pagans!" the people cried. "The pagans have come!" Villages burned. Monasteries fell. The river turned black with smoke and red with blood. From Rouen to the gates of Paris, the Northmen advanced, unstoppable, untamed, laughing as the terrified Franks fled before them. At the city's heart, King Charles the Bald gathered his council. "How many are they?" he demanded. "Thousands," came the reply, "led by one they call Ragnar, the sea devil." The king's face blanched. "Then God help us," he whispered, "for none else can." And beyond the horizon, the drums of the Vikings thundered, the sound of the storm that would swallow France. The Seine was calm that morning, too calm. Mist clung to the surface like a veil, and the fishermen of Rouen heard only the creak of oars before the river exploded with sound. Out of the fog came 40 longships, their dragon heads snarling, their sails striped like the wings of demons. "By Christ," whispered one monk from the tower, "the sea has come to eat us." The Vikings rowed in silence, their faces painted with ash, their shields glinting with rain. At the prow stood Ragnar Lodbrok, his cloak of wolf fur snapping in the cold wind, his eyes fixed on the river ahead. Behind him, his warriors began to chant, low, rhythmic, haunting. The chant grew louder until the very air seemed to shake. Blood for Odin, silver for the sea. They struck first at Rouen, smashing through its gates like thunder. The Franks fought bravely, but their swords were brittle against the axes of the Northmen. Flames devoured the city before noon. From there, the longships moved upriver, a serpent of death winding toward Paris. Every village on the banks of the Seine fell in their path. Priests were dragged from churches, gold was torn from altars, and the river ran red with the blood of those who prayed too late. Word of the invasion reached King Charles the Bald within days. He gathered his commanders, knights in shining mail, banners bearing the golden lilies of Francia, the strongest army in Western Europe. "They are but barbarians," one general scoffed. "They come for plunder. We shall break them upon the field and hang their king from his own mast." Charles nodded grimly. "Then meet them before they reach Paris. The Seine shall be their grave." The two forces met near Chartres, where the river curved through green fields now soaked in mist. The Franks stood in shining ranks, cavalry, archers, men-at-arms, thousands strong. Their armor gleamed in the morning light. Then the mist stirred, and the longships appeared, gliding silent as ghosts. Ragnar stood tall in the prow of his ship, a spear in one hand, his hair wild with wind and salt. He grinned. "So these are the lions of the south?" he said. Let's see if they bleed." The horns of the Vikings roared, echoing down the river, and the Franks, proud and glittering, watched in horror as the tide of the north crashed against them. The river had brought them war, and Ragnar had brought the end. The mist split apart with a sound like thunder. From the banks of the Seine, the Frankish army, proud, glittering, unbroken, watched in disbelief as the Viking fleet came slicing upriver like a storm of iron. 40 dragon-proud ships advanced in perfect rhythm, their oars striking the water with the steadiness of a war drum. At their head, Ragnar Lodbrok raised his spear. His voice cut through the wind. "Brothers, Paris lies ahead, but first we break their pride." A roar answered him, the sound of wolves before the kill. The Franks, armored and disciplined, formed ranks along the shore. Trumpets blared, banners snapped in the wind. Their commander, Count Odo of Orleans, famed for his valor, lifted his sword high. For the king, for Christendom. Then came the first volley, arrows raining from the river, black against the morning sky. The Franks raised shields, but the second volley struck before they could breathe. Men fell screaming into the mud, their blood staining the lilies on their banners. The longships rammed the banks, their hulls splintering against the shore. The Vikings leapt into the shallows with axes drawn, water churning around their legs. The Franks met them with steel and fury. Swords clashed, shields shattered. Horses screamed as arrows pierced their eyes. The sound was deafening. Iron on iron, men shouting prayers, others curses. Ragnar fought at the center, bareheaded, his axe spinning in deadly arcs. He laughed amid the chaos, shouting to his men, "Forward! Today the gods dine in Paris, and we bring the feast." The Frankish cavalry charged, hoofs pounding, their lances lowered. The Vikings braced, shields locked in a wall of oak and iron. The charge hit like a hammer and broke. Horses crashed into the shield wall, impaled on spears, their riders thrown and trampled. Then the Northmen counterattacked. Axes rose and fell in a brutal rhythm. The Franks, trapped between the river and the shield wall, began to falter. Odo of Orleans tried to rally them, shouting above the din, "Hold! They are but beasts. Hold the line." But the line was gone. The proud knights of Francia fell one by one, their armor sinking beneath the bloodied water. When the mist cleared, the Seine was red, the banks littered with corpses. Ragnar stood among the dead, his chest heaving, his hair soaked with blood and rain. He looked toward the north, toward the towers of Paris, and smiled. "The river is ours," he said. "Now we take the city." The greatest army in Francia lay broken at his feet, and the road to Paris stood wide open. The Seine wound like a silver serpent through a dying land. Smoke rose from its banks. Villages turned to ash, churches blackened husks. Wherever the Vikings passed, only silence and ruin remained. At the head of the fleet, Ragnar Lodbrok stood barefoot on the prow of his longship, watching the towers of Paris rise from the mist. Bells tolled from the city, desperate, endless. "Listen," he said to his men, grinning. "They're praying. They think their God will save them." The river widened, and the city came into view, surrounded by high stone walls, its bridges spanning the Seine like ribs of a dying beast. Inside those walls waited King Charles the Bald, and what remained of his shattered army. Paris was the jewel of Francia, a city of priests and scholars, merchants and kings. It had never fallen, not to Romans, not to Goths, not to time, until now. The Viking fleet anchored mid-river, the ships forming a floating fortress. Drums beat across the water, echoing between the towers. Ragnar's warriors lined the decks, their shields bright in the sunlight, their faces painted for death. From the walls, the Franks stared down in horror. "They've come from the sea itself," whispered a priest, "like demons from the deep." Ragnar cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted across the river. "Charles," he roared, "I am Ragnar, son of the north. Give me gold and I'll leave your city standing. Deny me, and I will make your churches sing with fire." There was no answer, only the tolling of the bells. Ragnar laughed. Then Paris will burn. At his signal, the longships surged forward, their oars slicing the water. Siege ladders were raised, ropes hurled toward the bridges. Arrows rained from both sides, darkening the sky. The Vikings struck first at the Petit Pont, a narrow bridge defended by knights and crossbowmen. The Franks fought fiercely, hurling stones and oil, but the weight of the attack was unstoppable. The bridge cracked, sagged, and collapsed into the river, taking men from both sides into the current. On the northern bank, the shield walls clashed again. The Franks tried to push the Northmen back into the water, but the Vikings fought like beasts, laughing, screaming the names of their gods. By nightfall, the outer defenses of Paris lay in ruins. The river glowed red in the sunset. Ragnar stood before the city's walls, torch in hand. "Tomorrow," he said, "we climb." He threw the torch into a wagon of pitch. The flames leapt high, lighting the night, and from the battlements, the people of Paris saw what hell truly looked like. 40 burning ships reflected in the river, and a man who smiled at the sight. Ragnar had come for gold, for glory, and for legend, and Paris would give him all three. Dawn came blood-red over the Seine. Smoke drifted above the water, thick and bitter. The bells of Paris rang wildly, their desperate clangs drowned by the sound of horns. Deep, thunderous, endless. The Vikings were coming. From the riverbanks, thousands of Northmen advanced beneath a forest of shields. Arrows whistled from the walls, striking wood and flesh alike. Men fell and were trampled, but the tide never stopped. Ragnar had promised them silver, slaves, and glory, and to his warriors that was worth dying for. Ragnar himself walked at the front, his wolfskin cloak dragging in the mud, his axe gleaming like fire. "Forward," he roared. "Let Paris remember our names until the end of the world." The assault began in a fury. Siege ladders slammed against the walls. Grappling hooks tore into the stone. The defenders fought with desperation, pouring boiling oil, hurling rocks, stabbing at hands that reached the parapets. But for every Viking who fell, 2 more climbed over his corpse. At the western gate, a massive battering ram, the skull of a ship mounted on wheels, smashed again and again into the wood until it splintered. The Franks fell back, choking in the smoke as fire swept through the lower streets. "Hold the bridges!" shouted Count Odo, the city's defender. His men rallied, swords drawn, fighting knee-deep in blood. For a moment, it seemed the tide could be stopped. Then Ragnar appeared atop the wall. No one saw how he got there, only that he stood suddenly above them, wild-eyed, blood-slicked, his axe dripping. He raised it high and bellowed, "Paris is mine!" The wall broke. The Franks scattered. Flames spread from the gates to the markets, the wind carrying sparks across the rooftops. By midday, the outer city had fallen. The survivors fled to the island in the Seine, Isle de la Cite, where the last defenders gathered inside the old Roman fort. From the shore, Ragnar watched the smoke curl skyward. "Beautiful," he murmured. "The gods can see us now." His men plundered the lower districts, churches stripped of gold, wine cellars emptied, monks dragged from hiding and ransomed. The river filled with corpses and silver both. That night, Ragnar stood on the cathedral steps, his shadow cast by the burning city. He lifted his cup, filled not with mead, but stolen Frankish wine, and shouted to his men, "Feast, brothers! Tonight, Odin walks among us." They roared back, their voices echoing over the flames. And as the bells of Paris fell silent, drowned by fire and laughter, the city that had never fallen knelt before a man from the sea. The city screamed. Smoke rolled through the streets of Paris like a living thing, curling through alleys, climbing the cathedral walls, choking the bells into silence. The air stank of iron, ash, and death. The Franks who had once called this city eternal now huddled behind its last defenses, the island fortress of the Isle de la Cite. Priests clutched relics, nobles clung to their gold, soldiers stared through the haze at the burning banks. Beyond the flames, on the northern shore, the Vikings feasted. Ragnar Lodbrok sat upon a throne of stolen wood, a makeshift seat atop a pile of plunder. Gold chalices, jeweled crosses, and carved icons surrounded him like trophies of a fallen faith. He raised a goblet filled with red wine and shouted to his warriors, "To the sea wolves, to Odin's sons, we have broken the walls of kings." A roar rose from the camp, drums pounding, shields clashing. But the celebration could not drown out the cries across the river. Thousands of Parisians begged for mercy, their voices echoing like ghosts. Even Ragnar's men began to wonder if they had gone too far. "Ragnar," said his shipwright Eric, "the city bleeds. Will you drown it too?" Ragnar turned to him, his eyes bright with madness and fire. "Paris is a prize," he said, "and a prize must be paid for." That night, under cover of darkness, he sent his men to the bridges. The Franks who guarded them were starving, broken, terrified. For a handful of silver, they opened the gates. At dawn, the Vikings crossed the bridges and poured onto the island. The last army of the Franks, knights, priests, and peasants alike, stood waiting before the cathedral, their armor dented, their faces pale. "Who commands you?" Ragnar called. A bishop stepped forward, trembling. "We serve King Charles. He will never surrender." Ragnar smiled coldly. "Then let him watch his kingdom burn." He gave the signal. The Vikings advanced like an avalanche. The Frankish lines shattered within minutes. Some threw down their swords, others fell to their knees, praying. But prayer could not stop the axe. By noon, the island was theirs. The banner of the lily fell. The flag of the raven rose. Ragnar stood at the doors of the cathedral, staring up at its spire. "This," he said, "is what kings call strength, stone and pride." He set fire to its doors. Flames roared, devouring the carvings of saints. Across the river, the survivors watched their holy city burn. Their army gone, their hope extinguished. The mightiest kingdom in Europe had been brought to its knees by men from the sea. And at the center of it all, Ragnar laughed, his voice carrying above the smoke. "Now," he said, "the gods will remember Paris." The Seine glowed red that night. Flames licked the sky, reflecting in the river as if the water itself had caught fire. The air was thick with ash and the sound of weeping. Paris, the greatest city of Francia, lay broken. Among the ruins walked Ragnar Lodbrok, bareheaded, his axe hanging loose at his side. Around him, the Vikings drank, laughed, dragged chests of gold and wine from the wreckage. But Ragnar's eyes were cold, distant. Eric, his shipwright, approached quietly. "We have enough, Ragnar. Silver, slaves, and song. Let us go home." Ragnar did not answer. He stared at the great cathedral still burning, the spire glowing like a torch in the night. "Not yet," he said. "Not until the king kneels." And so messengers were sent across the river to King Charles the Bald, who sat trembling in his fortress outside the city. The once mighty ruler of Francia looked more like a ghost than a king. Sleepless, pale, his hands shaking. The message was simple. "Give me 10,000 pounds of silver, or Paris dies." The royal council erupted in outrage. "Pay them?" cried the nobles. "It will shame the crown." Charles slammed his fist on the table. "It will save it," he shouted. "If Paris burns, all Francia burns with it." And so, grudgingly, the king agreed. The treasure of the realm was gathered. Coins from monasteries, relics melted down for silver. Even the church's gold was stripped from altars. For 3 days, carts rumbled to the Viking camp, heavy with treasure. When the last was delivered, Ragnar stood before the terrified envoys of the king. He dipped his hand into the chest, lifted a handful of silver coins, and let them fall between his fingers. "France," he said softly, "is rich in fear." He turned to his men. "Load the ships. We sail at dawn." The Vikings roared with joy. As they departed, the people of Paris crept from their hiding places. The city still smoldered, its churches blackened, its streets strewn with the dead. But it lived barely. From the walls, the The monks watched the dragon ships drift down the Seine, their sails red in the dawn light. One of them crossed himself and whispered, "God save us if they return." In the lead ship, Ragnar stood at the prow, wind in his hair, silver at his feet. Eric looked to him and said, "You've conquered the mightiest city in the west. What now?" Ragnar smiled faintly. "Now, the Skalds will remember." Behind them, the smoke of Paris rose like a crown, black, proud, eternal. And the Northmen sailed home with their legend written in fire. The Seine carried them home, a fleet heavy with plunder, echoing with song. 40 longships drifted toward the open sea, their holds bursting with silver, silks, and relics stolen from the heart of Christendom. The Vikings rode with joy, their laughter booming across the waves. They had done the impossible, destroyed Francia's strongest army, humiliated a king, and turned the greatest city of the West into their spoil. At the prow of the lead ship stood Ragnar Lodbrok, silent now, his cloak whipping in the wind. His eyes were fixed not on the horizon ahead, but on the memory of flames reflected in the Seine. Eric approached cautiously. "We have everything we wanted, Ragnar. Silver enough to buy kingdoms. Glory enough to outlive us all. Why do you not smile?" Ragnar's lips twitched. "Because kings forget," he said, "and so do gods." The sea grew rough as they neared the open waters. The wind screamed through the rigging. Waves slammed against the hull. To the men of the north, this was not terror, it was home. As night fell, the fleet gathered around great fires built on deck, singing to the gods. Ragnar stood apart, staring into the dark. He saw again the faces of the dying Franks, the burning crosses, the terrified eyes of children in the streets. He had done it for silver, for fame, for the sagas, and yet, deep inside, he wondered, what if this victory had woken something even darker? Eric's voice broke through his thoughts. "The men are calling you Conungur of Kings, the Hammer of the South. The gods favor you." Ragnar laughed quietly. "Gods favor no man for long. The waves rise for all." When they reached the open sea, the storm struck, savage and sudden. Waves towered over the longships. Thunder split the sky. The men rowed and prayed, shouting to Thor and Odin. Ragnar stood at the helm, gripping the tiller, rain streaming down his face. He bellowed into the storm, "You gave me Paris. Is this the price? Take me then, but let my name never die." Lightning flashed. For a heartbeat, the sea turned white, and in that light Ragnar looked like a figure carved from legend, defying the gods themselves. By morning, the storm was gone. The fleet had survived, though many ships were scattered. The horizon was calm again, gray, endless. Ragnar gazed east, toward home. "We've burned a kingdom," he murmured. "Now let's see if kings burn for it." Behind him, the rising sun turned the waves to gold, as if even the sea bowed to the man who had brought Paris to its knees. Weeks later, the longships of Ragnar Lodbrok cut through the fjords of Denmark like blades through still water. The cries of gulls replaced the screams of war. The scent of pine replaced that of blood. The north had called its sons home. Villagers lined the cliffs to watch them return. The sea wolves, the destroyers of kingdoms. The people shouted Ragnar's name, throwing torches high into the night. "Ragnar, Lord of the West, Breaker of Kings." He stepped ashore slowly, his boots sinking into the wet sand, the weight of gold heavy across his shoulders. His warriors followed, dragging chests of silver that gleamed even in the dying light. His wife, a slog, came to meet him, tall, regal, her eyes as sharp as the edge of a blade. "You have returned," she said softly, "and with the wealth of 1,000 dead men." Ragnar smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "Gold is a poor trade for peace," he said, "but it buys songs." That night, feasts erupted across the halls of the north. The sagas were sung, of the burning of Paris, of the fall of the Frankish knights, of how the river itself turned red beneath the dragon ships. Ragnar sat at the head of the table, his sons beside him, his cup full, his name immortal. Yet as the laughter grew, he fell silent. His youngest son, Ivar, noticed. "Father, why do you not smile? You have done what no man has done." Ragnar looked into the fire. When you burn a city, you hear its screams in your dreams. When you take a king's gold, his ghost follows you home. The hall quieted. Even the skalds stopped their songs. Eric, the shipwright, leaned forward. "Then what will you do now, Ragnar Lodbrok, king of the sea?" Ragnar's eyes gleamed. "A king?" he repeated softly. "No, I am a wanderer, and the gods are not done with me yet." He rose, lifting his horn. "Paris was but one gate. The world is full of others. Who among you will follow me through them?" 100 men leapt to their feet, roaring their loyalty. But a slog only watched him, her face unreadable. She saw something in him that the others did not, the restless shadow, the weariness behind his laughter. Later that night, when the hall had emptied and the fires burned low, Ragnar stood alone outside beneath the stars. The northern lights rippled above him, ghostly and green. He whispered, "I gave the world fire. Let it remember me in ash." And somewhere far to the south, King Charles the Bald sat in his chapel, staring at the empty treasury, whispering the same name with hatred and awe. Ragnar Lodbrok, the man who had burned his kingdom and become a myth. Years passed. The Seine healed, but the memory of its fire never faded. Paris rose again, rebuilt in stone and prayer. Yet beneath its new walls, the earth still whispered Ragnar's name. In Francia, the monks wrote of that terrible spring. "In the year of our Lord 845, the sea devils came from the north. They burned our cities, slew our knights, and made the proud king bow. The Lord spared the faithful, but the world trembled. And tremble it did. For the sack of Paris was not the end, it was the beginning. The gates of Europe had been opened by fire, and through them poured generations of raiders, settlers, and kings born of the north. The name Viking became both a curse and a legend. As for Ragnar Lodbrok, his story drifted between truth and myth. Some said he returned home rich beyond measure and died in peace, surrounded by his sons. Others whispered darker tales, that his pride led him east, to seek new kingdoms, and that he was captured by the king of Northumbria, thrown into a pit of serpents, laughing even as he died. Whatever the truth, his shadow lingered long after the man was gone. In Paris, King Charles the Bald grew gray and bitter. He ruled from behind walls rebuilt higher than before, his treasury empty, his faith shaken. When the northern winds howled, he would wake in terror, dreaming of dragon-headed ships gliding up the Seine. "Never again," he would mutter. "Never again will I bow to a pagan." But in the dark of his chapel, beneath the sound of prayer, he sometimes thought he heard laughter, rough, cruel, distant, carried on the wind from the sea. The laughter of Ragnar, for the world had changed. The might of Francia was broken, the Carolingian Empire scarred forever. And from that wound would rise a new age, an age of raiders, kings, and fire-born empires. In time, the Norsemen would become settlers, rulers, even Christians, but the old spirit of the sea never died. And so the skalds sang in their long halls. He came from the storm and left the world burning. The dragon's shadow fell on kings and crosses alike. Where Ragnar's sails touched the sky, no kingdom was ever the same again. The Seine still flows, calm and quiet. The city stands proud. But when the fog drifts from the north, and the bells of Paris ring faintly through the mist, some say you can still see them. Long ships gliding across the water, and a figure at their prow laughing. The sea will never forget its son, nor will the world.